Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, social marketers around the world. My name is Patrick Cook, and as president of the International Social Marketing Association, it's both my privilege and pleasure to introduce the 28th in a series of webinars designed to advance social marketing teaching, research, and practice. I'm here today with Susie Copperthorne, Catherine Sadler, and Jay Kassir. Susie is our technical host for the webinar series. Catherine helped organize today's webinar, and Jay is the manager for our webinar series. We're going to begin in just a minute, but before we do, I'd like to share some brief updates with you about the International Social Marketing Association. First, coming up in March, we will be holding our annual general meeting, hoping to have as many of our members join us for that. We're also looking for board members to join us. There are a number of folks who are volunteering to be a part of the board, but we'd love others to join. So look for more information on both the general meeting and how to join the board through a nomination and election process. Also just wanted to remind you that in addition to the social marketing associations in North America, in Europe, in Australia, and in the Pacific Northwest, we have 2 social marketing associations that are getting started in both Africa and Latin America, and would be happy to pass along contact information and more information about those organizations if you want to get in touch with me directly. I'll put my email address in the chat function so you can just contact me that way. So without further ado, I wanted to turn the webinar over to Jay. And Jay, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Patrick, and welcome everyone. I want to remind you that if there is more than one of you at your location, we'd appreciate it if you'd let us know how many you are using the chat box. So if there's just one of you, that's okay, we'll assume that. But if there's more than one, we need to know. Otherwise, unless you tell us, we don't know. Also, as we're going through today's webinar, please ask your questions using the text box as they come to you. Don't wait till the end of the talk. We'll answer your questions at the end in roughly the same order as they come in during the webinar. So we have 2 quick polls for you. First of all, how did you find out about this webinar? Appreciate it if you could click the box to let us know. Mostly through ISMA mail so far. Some SMANA mail, great. And Pacific Northwest as well, and some Twitter and website. Okay, good to see, thank you. And then I'm going to go on to the next one. Oh, maybe I have to do that before you can see it. There you go. So our next one and last of these 2 polls, where are you from, please? I'm seeing North America, Western Europe. And that's pretty much it on this one. Okay, great. So it's my privilege next to introduce our speaker today. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting used to the fact that now Catherine is doing this with me. Catherine's going to do that. So I'd like to turn the webinar over to Catherine, who's helping organize today's webinar. And we're doing roughly half of the webinars with us.
Yeah. Hey, good day to all. Thanks, Jay. And I am happy to introduce Rita Brophy as the featured presenter for today's webinar. Rita is a marketing professional of over 20 years, specializing in social marketing, social research, and training. Rita has conducted a vast body of work in audience research over many years with various target audiences on behalf of public sector and nonprofit organizations. She designs and delivers customized training programs to promote best practices in social marketing and research. This webinar focuses on programs of qualitative research that Rita conducted within the heart of the communities in Dudley, United Kingdom, identifying the psychological, cultural, ethnographic, and semiotic influences which informed these user-centered behavioral change programs. Rita?
Thank you, Catherine. Hello everyone, and thank you for listening in to my webinar on Co-creation Audience Research. Here is a brief synopsis of my credentials in social marketing, and I specialize in qualitative research methodologies, and for many social marketing studies, I, the researcher, am the only person in the room with the research participants in the fieldwork stage of the study. And following the fieldwork stage, I, like all researchers, will then analyse the findings, write a report, and present the insight and recommendations to the service providers or the research commissioners who have been completely remote from the fieldwork of the study. Co-creation audience research enables service providers to be actively involved in the fieldwork of a study by being in the room with the researcher and the research participants. This room can be a real room, or indeed it could be a virtual environment, as online methodologies are becoming more and more prevalent. Therefore, for example, a nurse and a doctor and a director of public health can be actively involved in the fieldwork, being in the room with the researcher and the research participants, giving them the opportunity to actively connect, engage, and have a dialogue with these participants. This is the key difference between co-creation research and traditional methodology, which involves a dialogue between only the researcher and the research participants. During this presentation, I will provide clear examples of both traditional and co-creation qualitative research methodologies in order to illustrate these differences more fully and to outline the benefits of each, and I will highlight how both methodologies can work together when delivering effective social marketing programs. So, to sum up, co-creation audience research is a type of research that connects different parties in order to work together to achieve a mutually beneficial outcome. So the key word is connected, within the same space during the fieldwork of the study. So within the context of co-creation research for social marketing, these parties include the researcher, that is a completely objective researcher and facilitator of the process, representatives of the service organization. This could be one person with decision-making capabilities or a number of people with vested interest in the research. Representatives of the target audience, that is members of the public who the program is aimed at, for example, smokers, dental non-attendees, people at risk of type 2 diabetes, etc. And co-creation research can be qualitative or quantitative and can involve face-to-face or, as I said earlier, online methodologies. But today I'm focusing on examples of qualitative co-creation audience research which I have directly been involved in. So what are the benefits of co-creation audience research? Well, there are benefits for both the service organisation and the target audience. So I've listed at the top here community engagement and equality. Members of the service organisation connect directly with members of the public as equal research partners in order to build the service together. This is a completely different dynamic to a typical interaction, for example, that of a patient and a nurse in a medical appointment. That said, although both are research partners in a piece of co-creation research, it is important to note that the most valuable opinions are those of the target audience, because the program is being designed to meet their needs. So it is up to the service providers to listen very carefully to members of the target audience, then to work together as partners to shape the program. This role in the development of the program offers the target audience the benefit of empowerment, as they know they are being listened to by the service provider, being reinforced to them that their opinions matter and that the service provider is focused on user-centered services, that is, those that are created by the public for the public. Members of the target audience involved in co-creation research can go on to become community assets, spreading the word about the program in local communities. And in these local communities, peer-to-peer promotion is often far more persuasive than a top-down communications campaign, which could be being perceived as being from a remote organization. The experience can also lead into voluntary work and careers, which I will give examples of later. Co-creation research also offers the benefit of agility. Decisions can be made far more quickly if the decision maker is to wait for a research report, for example. And also the decision maker can see, feel and hear the emotions of the target audience in a multidimensional environment rather than reading about these in a research report. These are the real wow moments that I mentioned in the title to the webinar. However, as we all know, research reports are also very important in order to document process and findings for non-attendees. And for both parties, it is motivating and inspiring. Creating a program together is energizing for all involved, and there is a sense of ownership from both sides, enabling promotion of it with enthusiasm rather than it being seen as a chore or another job to do. And I give examples of all of these benefits within this presentation. So when should you use co-creation audience research? Well, it can be used in the following stages of a social marketing program: design, development, implementation, and evaluation, because it involves task orientation, idea generation, and collaboration. Essentially, its purpose is in its title, that is, creation. For example, to create and develop and design a new service or to improve an existing service. Typically, it is not for the scoping stage of a social marketing program, because personal issues, sensitive subjects, and emotional deep dives are most appropriately explored in an intimate environment involving only the researcher and the research participants. So there is opportunity for both co-creation and non-co-creation audience research to be built into a social marketing strategy, and I will now show you two examples of this. Both of these examples are from the Office of Public Health in Dudley, and the first of these is improving patient outcomes in cervical screening. The second is increasing acceptability of breastfeeding in public places. So Dudley is a large town in the West Midlands of England. It is close to the city of Birmingham. And here is a picture of Dudley. In the background, you can see a castle, which is now part of Dudley Zoo. And in the high street is in the foreground. This is populated by very small shops and market stalls. And in its past, Dudley was characterized by being a thriving industrial centre based around the potteries, which involved the production of ceramics. But today this industry has declined, and now some areas within Dudley Borough are economically disadvantaged. So the first case study that I'm going to share with you is co-creation to improve patient outcomes in cervical screening. So the National Health Service cervical screening program, or the smear test as it's very commonly referred to here in England, was introduced to England in 1988. Screening can identify precancerous changes in the cells on the cervix, that is the neck of the womb. All women aged between 25 to 64 and who have a cervix are eligible for cervical screening. Women aged 25 to 49 years receive invitations every 3 years, whilst women aged 50 to 64 receive invitations every 5 years. And attendance at one's first cervical screening appointment is a crucial step on the journey to regular attendance, because if a female misses her first appointment, or if she has a poor experience at her first appointment, she may not attend in future, placing her health at risk. And as cervical cancer is the most common cancer in women under 35, it is imperative to encourage attendance at the first screening appointment. And that is exactly what the programme aim was, to encourage females in Dudley aged 25 to 29 years to attend their first cervical screening appointment. So we started with scoping research, which was non-co-creative qualitative research to identify the barriers to attendance, because cervical screening is typically a very sensitive subject. So this was research involving only the researcher and research participants. And the barriers that we unearthed were primarily an invincibility mindset. Because these are young women, their attitude was, I'm young, I'm fine, I'm healthy, it will not happen to me. And there was also an acute fear of the embarrassment and discomfort of the invasive procedure. Cervical screening involves an instrument called a speculum, which is placed inside the body, and many women fear this and the embarrassment they will feel in front of the nurse. So following this research, we went on to developmental research, which were co-creation workshops conducted in the context of a GP surgery. We had 2 workshops of 3 hours each. These involved 15 research participants each. All were females reticent to attend their cervical screening. Now within these workshops there was myself, the objective researcher. There was also the social marketing lead from the service organisation, who filmed the sessions for use in rollout training workshops with GP nurses and receptionists. And as I'm sure you're aware, when filming or recording, you must have signed consent from research participants, tell them exactly how the film will be used, exercise extreme caution with personally identifiable information, and fully abide by data protection law. So as well as myself and the social marketing lead in these co-creative research sessions, there was the practice nurse. She was in uniform and she asked questions and followed the procedure as she typically would do in a cervical screening appointment. And there was also an actress who took the role of a cervical screening patient using target audience language that we had identified in the scoping research. Although, needless to say, the actress did not undergo an actual cervical screening during this research. So, what did we learn? Well, the reactions were visceral. They were far more vivid than I'd seen in non-co-creative research. There were some real wow moments. The environment was very stimulating. There was strong verbal and non-verbal reactions to the sight of the speculum, the bed, the nurse's questions, even the nurse's computer and the medical smell in the room. And we co-created a tailored program for cervical screening. So, as I said, the social marketing lead and the nurse were in the room. They were able to have a dialogue with these research participants. And some women told them that they were so fearful of the procedure, they would rather have the test first, then answer questions. Some of them said that they were so nervous when they entered the room that when they were asked some rather simple questions, they struggled to answer them because of their fear of the procedure. Therefore, they said it would be far better for them to get the procedure out of the way and then to answer questions, whereas typically in all of the screening appointments, it was always questions first and then the test. Some women wanted more explanation about why certain questions were being asked. In a cervical screening appointment, there can be questions that are asked that can seem very personal. However, they are very pertinent to the screening procedure. However, the women didn't understand that, but when it was explained to them, so that we were co-creating insofar as they were able to be explained this first, then ask the questions, rather than just ask the questions and then wondering, again placing them ill at ease. They asked if the procedure could be done by less invasive means. but it was explained by the nurse that this element could not be changed, and when she explained why, there was more understanding and acceptance of it. And we also learned a lot about the importance of making initial eye contact, tonality, and language around the whole procedure itself and the whole interaction. So by enabling the females to change the elements that could be changed, we were giving them some control over this process, which meets a very high order emotional need state and combats the feeling of vulnerability that many have alluded to in scoping sessions. I have actually conducted a lot of cervical screening research in which the topic of vulnerability and the female feeling very vulnerable comes up time and time again. So this is really offering them that element of control. And because reactions were so animated, we were able to identify 4 user personas or patient typologies, which were communicated to staff in training workshops, so they could adapt their tone of delivery at each appointment to suit the female patient's persona. So for example, one of these was the novice, that is the 25 to 29-year-old female who needs educating and extreme caretaking throughout. So we went on to roll out these insights as follows. There was cytology training, supervision, GP staff meetings. We delivered a series of effective communication and program delivery workshops for receptionists and nurses from GP practices across the Dudley borough, and we also created a campaign with the target audience. I'm going to show you the campaign in a moment, but first I'd like to discuss the broad guidelines for running a co-creation research study. So it's very important that the target audience must be fully informed up front at the recruitment stage about what the topic is, who the team members are, that is, members of the service organisation, and their role in the research. So to sum up, they really be transparent at that recruitment stage. Let them know exactly what they're signing up for, if you like. Plan ahead. Inform service organisation staff that the target audience are the most important drivers of the service, that they must listen intently to the target audience. Have sticky notes and pens to record verbatim comments, and you can come together as a team to group these into themes. So you're actually conducting analysis within the research, which links to the agility benefit that I mentioned earlier. You're actually moving the process along within the research session itself. And it's very important to set clear responsibilities. For example, one member of the team may be responsible for taking notes, another for filming, another to present ideas, but they should know exactly what their role is before going in. And it's absolutely vital to have a lead researcher, an objective researcher, who will manage the process and the people objectively. So they'll take care of group dynamics, they'll encourage reticent participants to speak up, they'll allay dominant participants, and they'll manage the discussion flow and ensure that all topic areas are covered. And one of the crucial aspects of this is to ensure that all questions are asked openly. In fact, I run pre-fieldwork coaching sessions on open questioning techniques and the importance of objective listening, in which I instruct the team to park their opinions, beliefs, and indeed even their ego at the door. Imagine they've taken them off like a coat and hung them outside the room so that they can be a blank canvas and open to all attitudes and ideas. And then also inside the room, I would state the rules, and I'll always do this on a piece of flip chart paper or card. This will be placed on the wall. These rules are equality. All opinions are valid and valued. There are no right or wrong answers. It's not a test. Nobody there is being judged. And perception is reality. It's important that if the target audience perceive it that way, then that's the way it is. That's an important thing to understand. and to be brave and open to criticism. If you want to make improvements to a service, then you should really be asking for a critique of it. And also the importance of anonymity and confidentiality with signed confidentiality agreements and abiding by data protection law. And obviously I mentioned the rules on filming earlier. So following our co-creative research, we needed a fresh narrative to resonate with and motivate females aged 25 to 29 years to attend their first cervical screening appointment. So we started with some non-co-creative scoping research, which included a mix of individual interviews and focus groups. And within these, there was opportunity for ethnographic observation and semiotic insight. So many of the young women made the excuse of having no time to attend their smear test, yet it was observed that they had time for their appearance. For example, hair extensions, manicured nails, shaped eyebrows, etc., all of which involved salon visits. So it was observed that when they want to do something, they will make the time to do it. Also, all had smartphones, and they revealed that they enjoyed engaging with short, sharp sound bites and images, and they used emojis. Therefore, visual shorthand was part of their everyday language. We then went on to developmental research with poster creation in friendship pairs using magazine clippings, and often in co-creation, I work with an illustrator in the room who will listen to the target audience, draw their ideas, refine them, redraw them, etc. So again, that links to the agility benefit, moving the process along within the research. Then concepts were developed by a creative team based on the target audience's posters. I then conducted deep dives into these concepts, and the lead concept was developed into the campaign, which I'm now going to share with you. So the core message was beautiful on the outside and inside. And this message resonates with the target audience because it was co-created with them. The main headline refers to beauty, not health. And whilst this positively grabs attention, the campaign materials do educate the audience about the health benefits of cervical screening. Now, I mentioned earlier that scoping research had revealed visual shorthand was part of their everyday language. And you can see the bejeweled heart, which was the mascot, if you like, of this campaign. And it is a visual shorthand, the heart meaning love. It is a semiotic symbol of taking care of oneself, and the precious stones linking to personal value, so taking care of you. You are precious. And then the line that was used throughout the campaign was, your smear test is more than skin deep, and it had a very clear call to action. Book it today. So here is the rollout of the program and its delivery. The branding was target audience relevant throughout. The materials were not medicinal looking, as these were off-putting to the target audience. The young women felt that medical materials were, to use one of their words, scary. And also, as I said earlier, there was an invincibility mindset. Therefore, sometimes with medical materials, they would discard them, thinking that, well, it's not really going to happen to me. So we kept the branding very much based on their co-creative element throughout. We had giveaways, which were given outside colleges, of items linked to beauty, again heavily branded with the message. These were compact mirrors and emery boards. We had educational roadshows throughout the borough. There was also a local advertising campaign, and there was web presence, which was vital for this tech-savvy audience. And there was also an information leaflet to educate them, which was sent with the invitation letter, which again had exactly the same branding. So even the invitation letter, which would usually be quite a very formal medical invitation, it still had this semiotic symbol of the heart to link everything through and make it more user-friendly for this target audience. Again, keeping away from any sort of medical looking imagery. And as well as this, there were training workshops with practice nurses and receptionists, which were evaluated using a questionnaire with a series of rating scales. So pre-workshop, the rating of knowledge about how to ensure patients have a positive interaction when booking and attending cervical screening was 4 out of a possible 5, which was very good. However, post-workshops, this had risen to 5 out of 5, which was excellent. So medical staff who already felt their knowledge was very good felt they could understand patient needs more fully via this co-creative approach, which was a real wow moment and links through to this ownership benefit that I mentioned earlier. So now I'm coming on to the second case, which is co-creation to increase acceptability of breastfeeding in public places. In Dudley, breastfeeding rates are low compared to other areas of the UK. You can see a chart there which shows you some comparative figures. These figures are from 2014 when the programme started, and this programme is still ongoing today. In many economically deprived areas within Dudley, bottle feeding is the norm. And scoping research involving members of the public and health professionals, midwives and health service visitors had revealed barriers to breastfeeding in public places, including family and community attitudes and behaviour. And these included at one extreme outright disapproval, or at the other extreme a lack of encouragement. So the programme aim was a very single-minded proposition to increase the acceptability of breastfeeding in public places throughout Dudley Borough. It was a civic engagement programme. It was not to promote the benefits of breastfeeding per se. This was actually being done with other campaigns. So this involved a co-creative strategic direction. So the strategic team included the Director of Public Health, the Social Marketing Lead, the Research Lead, that was myself, so as I say, a completely objective researcher, breastfeeding programme staff, there was 3 of them, there were 2 midwives, and there were 5 members of the target audience, and these are called breastfeeding buddies. Now the breastfeeding buddies are volunteers from the Dudley community who are breastfeeding or have breastfed their baby, and who help other mothers in children's centres or hospitals to breastfeed their baby. Sometimes mums have difficulty with breastfeeding, the baby may not latch on immediately, and so the breastfeeding buddies are there to offer health advice and support to these new mums. So co-creation was embedded into the strategy to create a public-centred programme. So it started with audience insight, which I carried out. So I carried out storytelling research with the breastfeeding buddies, i.e. the target audience, and midwives, to ascertain their perception on the issues and suggested ways forward. We then, as a co-creative team, developed the programme by formulating the specific aims and objectives, the strategic direction, the key milestones, the promotional content, and the programme delivery, which culminated in community-wide events to coincide with UNICEF's World Breastfeeding Week. So the target audience and the service providers were engaged at key milestones throughout this whole process. And the core messages that we wanted to communicate were that breastfeeding is natural, it's out in the open, not hidden, and it's a family affair. And we tested these in qualitative research, and one of the words we tested was normal. In fact, we actually started with breastfeeding is normal as the message we wanted to send. But the word normal caused intense reactions. It actually caused offence. Culminating in statements like, what may be normal to you is not necessarily normal to me. So this highlights the need to be very respectful of the target audience with regards to language and also imagery. And co-creation enables you to test and refine and test and refine. So I put it to the audience, if normal isn't the word, then what is? And they came up with the word natural, which was universally accepted. Even bottle feeding mothers said that, yes, of course, it is natural. We can't say any other. So therefore, it was not at risk of causing the offence that the word normal was. And in many research sessions, respondents have told me they've felt offended, labelled, judged and patronised by campaign messages or indeed verbal exchanges with health professionals. And as I said earlier, their perception is reality. I'm sure that the health professionals, maybe the campaign creators would say that was never the intention, but perception is reality. So co-creation is really an empathetic research methodology. It's not remote or top-down in its delivery. So now I'm showing you the campaign, and I mentioned one of the benefits of co-creation earlier as being community assets. And we created a mixed media campaign across multi-channels, and the key components within this were the breastfeeding buddies and their families. They really did become ambassadors and champions of change because of their involvement in the co-creative strategy. So you can see here the campaign was visibly co-created with the community in community settings, not being a top-down campaign at all. So you can see there's a mum breastfeeding her baby, and Dudley has very mixed ethnicity, so she's in the town centre. You can see quite clearly that there's people simply getting on with their shopping and doing whatever they want to do, and this mum's there just breastfeeding out in the open, not hidden, which was obviously a big message we wanted to send. And the headline, breastfeeding is one of the most natural things ever. Next to that, there is an appointment card. So these were given out to women who were attending their antenatal classes. So these were going out to pregnant women, and it was actually letting them know when their next appointment was. But again, it was sending the message that mums can breastfeed everywhere in the borough. And then there was the website. You can see that below. Family out in a cafe, just breastfeeding there, and it's one of the most natural things ever, as it says. And these could have been snapshots, if you like. Someone could have just been going around the town centre, taking these images with their phone. They were designed to look very natural, and indeed they are so natural because these really are members of the community out there in the community breastfeeding their babies. And here we have another example. And where we have here on the left-hand side, we have the Merry Hill Shopping Centre, which is in Dudley. And in the foreground, there are two breastfeeding project workers. So they're posing as two ladies who have been shopping and are now taking a break and having a conversation. And then we've got a breastfeeding buddy, so a member of the target audience, a member of the community is out there feeding her baby with them just having their conversation there. And then on the other side, we have a family, again a breastfeeding buddy and a partner in a local park. So these are very striking, natural images, and it really has the wow factor. It demonstrates co-creation in practice. So how effective was the campaign? Well, we conducted 200 on-street interviews pre-campaign and 200 on-street interviews post-campaign. There was a mix of gender, age and ethnicity, a balanced split from 5 economically deprived wards in the Dudley borough. And at the interview stage, all respondents were screened as being undecided or thought that bottle feeding was the best way to feed a baby. And as you can see, the attitudes pre-campaign are in the yellow boxes, with the attitudes post-campaign being in the red boxes. And the question was, is breastfeeding acceptable in all public places? And as you can see, the pre-mothers and pre-fathers, these were people who weren't parents at the moment but said they would like to be parents in future. As you can see with the pre-mothers, 33% thought that it was acceptable in all public places pre-campaign, and this had risen significantly to 80% post-campaign. And likewise, you can see the pre-fathers, 27% going up to 56%. With mothers, is breastfeeding acceptable in all public places? This rose from 49% pre-campaign to 77% post. Fathers went up significantly from 28% to 74%. Now, when we come on to grandmothers and grandfathers, it did increase from pre-campaign to post-campaign, but their attitude there wasn't so much of a significant difference, although it did rise, which was good news, but the hypothesis is that the older respondents are perhaps a little more set in their ways than the youngers. So these results really did have the wow factor. This co-created campaign made a difference in changing attitudes, and as we all know, changing attitudes is the gateway to changing behaviour. So, in conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a testimony for co-creation from Val Kerr, a consultant in public health Dudley, who was part of the management team who headed up these programs. And she says that staff can sometimes be too close to an issue. Their views and opinions can override community views or needs. And in this approach, that is a co-created approach, communities play a crucial role in shaping the end product. And in today's webinar, I hope that I have demonstrated that the end products of co-creation audience research are user-centered services that effectively resonate and engage with the communities that have helped to create and shape them and have positively impacted on the service providers who deliver them.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pardon? Thank you very much, Rita. That was wonderful, informative, and I hope that I learned a lot, and I appreciate the information. I do have a couple of questions. I have one question that deals with the discussion on co-creation and the difference between the co-creation discussions and focus groups. Could you expand on that, please?
Yes, absolutely. In traditional focus groups, in the focus group participant room, there would be the researcher and there would also be the group of respondents. So that could be a group from, say, 6, 8, 10 respondents, depending on the size of the group. In a piece of co-creation research, within that room, there would be the researcher, the respondents, and there would be at least one representative from the research commissioning company, who I call service providers. So basically, there's a decision maker in the room, if you like. I mean, there could be more than one, but what it means is that as ideas are being discussed and debated, that person can actually contribute. They can ask questions. They can actually say, as I said in the case of the nurse, for example, I wouldn't have been able to answer as a researcher in a focus group if a lady said to me, can it be done any other way? Does it have to use the speculum? Can it not be done with, say, a blood test, for example? All I could say to that was that I can log, what you've said, and obviously I can feed that back to the team. Whereas a nurse in the room, in a co-creative session, she can actually answer that with authority, with medical authority, and she can move that question along. It's out there, it's being answered, and then we can move across that. So basically that is the key difference between the two.
Thank you. That question came from Carolyn. Now, expanding on that, there's usually a set time limit for a focus group. In this type of question and answer session, what time frame do you try and stick to?
Well, in terms of a co-creation workshop, as the ones that I was talking about in this seminar, they were actually 3 hours in duration. Because so they were longer than a typical focus group. In a typical focus group, I would spend 1.5 to 2 hours. But these are longer sessions, or they were certainly. because we had to set up, we had to prepare. There was a lot more preparatory work because with the actress being involved, we had to run through script, we had to check with the respondents that they were, because we'd done the scoping research to get audience insight around language and terminology, but we had to verify that they were comfortable with that themselves. So there was a bit more time involved there. And also, because you've got more people in the room, for example, in that there was the nurse and there was the social marketing lead, so there's questions not only potentially coming from the researcher, although I would stress that the researcher should very much lead the process and should be asking the majority of the questions, but it means that you leave room and space, if you like, and time for the others to also be involved in that as well, and maybe a question-answer sessions throughout, and the researcher will invite other team members, other co-creation team members to come in as and when appropriate. So it's like all research, it's very unique in terms of when you're designing your research program and you know your objectives, then you will decide on the length of your focus groups. It's the same with a piece of co-creative research. There isn't one definitive time limit to it, but you obviously have to be mindful of what you need to cover in the ground that in the time that you have.
Okay, wonderful. Natalie has asked if you could tell us some insight or best practices from your experience using ethnographic observation in the first intervention and about the use of storytelling in the second intervention. So let's go with the first part of that question. Using the ethnographic observation in the first intervention, what were your experiences and what did you learn as best practices?
So in terms of ethnographic observation, I often run a lot of research studies actually in, sometimes in respondents' homes. I work, as well as social marketing projects, I work with commercial marketers in health and well-being sectors. And often we'll start out a big piece of co-creative research, which we label a concept lab. It could be a 3-day study. And we start with ethnographic observation. And this will often take place in the home of the research participant. And we're simply observing how they interface with whatever it is that we're researching. And in the case of this study, the cervical screening study, it was conducted within the actual focus group setting. It wasn't really the intention of the focus groups were there to scope and to actually deep dive into barriers and enablers to attending cervical screening appointments. But it actually became apparent to me on observation these issues that I mentioned, where the women were very well made, and often they'll give irrational responses to why they can't do something. But it's up to us as qualitative researchers to really use everything in our toolbox and really dig deeper and deeper to find out the sort of more irrational and emotional reasons. So in terms of best practice for ethnographic observation, simply you would need to explain to the respondent that why you wanted to engage with them, so whatever the particular subject was. So we would like to observe you doing whatever. Now, more and more we're using online methodologies for this, because some of the more sensitive subjects that we're researching, certainly for health and well-being brands, they might involve people engaging, say, in, for example, it may be some sort of hygiene routine, let's say, but it's not something that necessarily they want us to sort of stand in their bathroom watching them do. However, they will allow us to film that, and then they'll beam it so we can see that. But you need to be very transparent, very upfront as to what you're going to use this for. Obviously, again, about the confidentiality issues and not sharing of information. But as I say, observing, and then once you've observed, so let them, whatever it is you're observing, let the person just do everything as they naturally and normally would. Say to them, you know, imagine I'm a fly on the wall, that I'm not really in this room, if you like. If you can do as you normally would, and then only after they've done that would you be probing verbally into why they did certain things and asking to explain, you know, what it is that prompted them to do that then or that then, this kind of probing. But again, first of all, just observe and then ask them to tell the story of that. And which brings me on to storytelling, actually. And the storytelling method is a method that I often use in research, going very broad on a subject. Sometimes, you know, you've got the agenda to go in and let's say you need to talk to a young woman about her cervical screening appointment. Actually, it's often best to go in very broad and discuss basically her life with her and what's important to her at the moment and tell the story about you, and then you can go into further stories as you go along, and these stories should have a beginning, a middle and an end. So for example, for cervical screening, it could be around, so tell me when you first learned about cervical screening, what did you hear? So that's the beginning of the story, and then but she'll talk it through uninterrupted, and then she'll talk about when she received the letter and how she then, what she did with that letter, where did she put it, etc., so forth, and you know, how is she feeling about going ahead and having this screening or not. So it's really getting them to really flesh out their emotions around the topic by telling these stories and bringing them to life.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that clarified the question for Natalie. And if we have another question, and the team member would love to hear how the Dudley team worked with the diverse community in Dudley. For example, in the breastfeeding posters, you can see women in, I think the word is hijab, or hijab. Well, anyway, sorry. Did any of the co-creation research involve women of different ethnic and cultural traditions?
Yes, indeed it did. And it also involved partners, so women and men of different ethnic traditions. So one of the things actually, which I didn't include in the presentation only for time, I did mention the word normal, and I mentioned the issues around that for some people. And some of the concepts we were showing, some of them showed more of the woman's breast than others. And we found, certainly across some religious groups, that this was deemed to be, it could be offensive if too much of breast was shown. And so whilst that we communicated that breastfeeding should be out in the open, we were very respectful to ensure that in this sort of mixed ethnicity and mixed religious environment of Dudley, to be very respectful of wishes across all cultures.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. We have basically a minute left. Would you care, Jay, to go forward with our webinar at this point?
Sure, Catherine. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the participants in today's webinar. As you leave the webinar, you'll be offered the opportunity to fill out a short evaluation form, and we depend on your answers when developing our upcoming webinar. So please let us know what's working and what you'd like us to do differently in the future. Please check out our upcoming events with the International Social Marketing Association. They're available for your reference on the ISMA website in the calendar section. And in particular, I'll draw your attention to our upcoming webinar on March 28th, 29th, depending where you're living, on the time. This one will be presented by Brooke Sadowski-Tilley, who happens to be with us in today's webinar, called Messages That Motivate, Leveraging Behavioral Insights to Design Powerful Social Marketing Messages. Check it out on the ISMA website. Registration is already open, so we'll hope to see you there as well. And finally, thanks to Susie Copperthorne for handling the technical aspects of today's webinar, to Catherine Sadler for helping organize and for joining our webinar production team, and to Patrick Cook, ISMA's second president. Patrick, over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Jay, and just let me echo the thanks to Susie, to yourself and to Catherine for all the work that went into today's webinar. It was, you make it seem so effortless. And Rita, thank you very much for the presentation and the discussion today. It was fascinating, so really appreciate you doing that. And thank you to our members and to those participants who joined us today for this webinar, as well as for your continued support and participation in the International Social Marketing Association. As Jay just mentioned, we hope you can join us again in March for our next webinar. And of course, don't forget that there will be some information coming out about our annual general meeting, about how to become more involved in the International Social Marketing Association, and of course, other things that are coming up in the future. So without further ado, this is the International Social Marketing Association, and we now conclude today's webinar.